My name is Vicki Portway, and I'm head of Web and New Media for Smithsonian's National Air and Space Museum here in Washington, D.C. It's partly sunny here. I hope it's sunnier where you are. I also serve on the board of directors for MCN, the Museum Computer Network, and I'm very happy to introduce today's workshop and welcome our expert presenters. We have three great presenters: Dana Allen Greel from National Gallery of Art here in D.C., Jane Finnis from Culture 24 in the UK, and Seb Chan from Smithsonian Cooper Hewitt National Design Museum in New York. Thank you all for doing this workshop today. For those of you who are unfamiliar with MCN, we're a volunteer-run nonprofit organization dedicated to, this is our mission, supporting museum information professionals and the greater community by providing opportunities to explore and disseminate new technologies and best practices in the field. It's a mouthful. MCN does this through our annual conference. We have special interest groups. We have a very active online community, and now we have this workshop series. The MCN Pro Workshop Series is a newer initiative produced as a partnership between MCN and Learning Times. And we see MCN Pro as a way to extend those really energizing conversations that occur at annual conferences every year and provide some online professional development, but throughout the year. This is meant to be sort of hands-on. Being online, it's, I guess, mounts on, you would call it. Based on surveys, this topic was one of the most popular in terms of interest among the community. So I'm really excited to have these amazing experts here today to take you beyond the numbers of social media metrics and really look at how to define and integrate social engagement into your overall digital success metrics and immerse you in some real-world data to show you how you can measure success. So it should be a really great interactive workshop. Just a couple of quick announcements before I turn things over to Dana, our moderator. We've got 2 more MCN Pro workshops planned this year. One is on digital asset management for small and mid-sized institutions. That's on June 25th. And we also have another on digital project management, developing a toolkit for successful project delivery. That is on September 10. So I encourage you to check those out. Our annual conference is coming up November 20 to 23 in Montreal, Canada. And we're currently accepting proposals. So if you're inspired to present something, please do submit those by May 15th. That's the deadline. And you can go to mcn.edu for more information about that. For today's workshop, the official hashtag is MCNPro, but due to the topic, we're also encouraging you to use the Muse Social hashtag. So please feel free to chat on those. If you use MCN Pro, you have a greater chance of getting a badge. Yes, we have badges. After this workshop, you're going to receive an email from Credly, so go ahead and trust that. All participants are going to get a scholar badge. And anyone who posts 3 or more questions here in the workshop is going to get a contributor badge. And if you tweet more than 10 times with the MCN Pro hashtag, you'll get a networker badge. So that's our badging. Also, a recording of this workshop will be available to all registered attendees, that's you, a few days from now on the mcnpro.org website. And finally, at the end of this workshop, we're going to ask you for your feedback. So we really hope you'll let us know how you enjoy the program and help inform how we present future workshops. So to introduce our moderator for today's workshop, Dana Allen Greel. She leads digital strategy for education at the National Gallery of Art in Washington, D.C. Prior to the National Gallery, Dana spent 8 years at the National Museum of American History, where she started, managed, and evaluated their social media initiatives, among other things. So she has a great deal of experience. She has given numerous papers and presentations on social media engagement, all of which I recommend you look up. So without further ado, I'm going to turn things over to Dana to introduce our speakers and tell you how the workshop's going to work today.
Great, thank you, Vicki. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone all around the globe. Thank you for joining us. I'm very excited about moderating today's session because it is going to be very interactive. With our presenters, Jane Finnis and Seb Chan, we're going to be in the hands of 2 rock stars of the museum technology field. So let me tell you a little bit about them. Jane Finnis is the Chief Executive of Culture 24, which is an independent charity supporting the arts and heritage sector in the UK. And she leads an action research project called Let's Get Real, which helps cultural organizations define and measure their success online. And we'll be hearing a lot about that today. Seb Chan is Director of Digital and Emerging Media at the Smithsonian's Cooper Hewitt National Design Museum in New York. He is responsible for the museum's complete digital renewal, and he was previously based at the Powerhouse Museum in Sydney. He's known for his expertise in open access, mass networked collaboration, digital strategy, cultural sector metrics, and cultivating innovation in the cultural sector. So before I hand things over to Jane and Seb, I just want to tell you a little bit about what to expect during today's session. I said that the workshop is going to be interactive, and in that spirit, we have recruited three brave organizations to share their web and social media analytics data with all of us. So during the course of their presentations, Seb and Jane will be conducting a live analysis of their data, which all of us will be able to see and follow along. So I want to give a little shout out and a thank you to those three brave organizations for letting us sort of peer over their shoulders and learn from them, essentially bearing their souls for the benefit of the rest of us. So I'm going to thank Jesse and Allison at the Imperial War Museums, Willa and Bridget at SF MoMA, San Francisco Museum of Modern Arts, and Lisa and Abby at the Museum of Jewish Heritage. We'll be hearing from them very shortly. So without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Seb and Jane, and I will see all of you in the chat. One last thing, is that you should feel free to use the text chat throughout this session, and we will be answering questions as they come up. We will also be saving 30 minutes at the end for Q&A. So if your question doesn't get answered in the chat or get brought up to Seb and Jane in that first part, we will definitely try to get to it in that last 30 minutes. So thanks again, and I'll hand it over to Seb and Jane.
Before Seb and Jane take over, this is Susan from Learning Times, and I just want to tell those of you who are using the chat, it is normal to see your own message twice. Nobody else sees it twice, only you, so don't worry about that. And now, Seb, go right ahead. Jane.
Hi, all. Jane and I are
Hi, everybody.
Experimenting with this new form of collaborative learning. So let's see how it goes. Jane's sitting in sunny Brighton, and I'm sitting in a closet in New York. So, Jane, what are we going to do, eh?
Yeah, I wish it was sunny, actually. It's not very nice. What we thought we'd do is start by telling you the story of the Let's Get Real Action research project that I've been leading in the UK with Culture 24, and Seb's been working on it. But because Seb and I have collaborated together for, I guess, nearly 10 years now, he'll kind of jump in and intervene and take us off on some tangents, I think, to go into more detail. So, Seb, unless you've got anything else, I'll kind of start the story a couple of years ago.
Yeah. Look, I think that's good. I would re-emphasize that people should ask things in the chat window. I'll be monitoring that and responding where I know stuff, and where I don't, I'll pretend I do. Actually, no, I'll pass it to other people. Yeah, let's give some background to this, Jane, and then we'll go through it all, eh?
Okay, so, well, basically, for those of you that don't know, Culture 24 is an organization that exists in the UK. We do a lot of web publishing, but our main mission is to kind of help the sector reach people on digital platforms. So we brought together this group of people in 2011. In some ways, it was a sort of Alcoholics Anonymous for web analytics, people coming together sort of with a similar set of problems, all wanting to try and do their online stuff better, identify how they can improve what they're doing. They were from these organizations, and they were pretty much the people on the digital teams in those organizations. The project was collaboratively funded. 50% of the money came from those organizations putting some money in, and then Culture 24 matched that with some government funding. And you may have seen, or you may even have read, this report, Let's Get Real, which was published about 18 months ago, which is the result of that first set of research. Now, the kind of key stuff that came out of the report was a kind of shared desire to ask a kind of quite a deep probing question that is quite difficult to answer. So this is the question, okay, who cares? Who actually cares about the online stuff that we're doing? Do we know who they are? Do we know why they visit us? Are they the same people that come through our doors, or are they different people? And the group were all interested in trying to get real about the who these audiences were and the kind of why. So we started, we did a kind of, started doing a reality check, looking at what was the attention share? What was the attention share that our sector was getting as a whole online? So Culture 24 did a couple of things which were quite shocking, I think, in what came up. So what we did is, some of you may know about Hitwise, which is a UK, it's a commercial service that does looks at traffic, monitors traffic through IP addresses, and it does competitor analysis. So if you're in the kind of commercial sector, a lot of people have Hitwise accounts which they pay for to kind of be able to see the journey that people take to their website and beyond their website. So it's kind of does Google Analytics, but further. So it looks at where people are coming from, where they're going, and compares you with other people. So what we did is we took the top 40 websites in the UK, cultural sites, we added all of their traffic together, and we compared it in 1 month in June 2011 to see what was the overall attention share of the top 40 UK cultural websites in online kind of web traffic in the UK. And this was the result. It was less than 0.04%. So that's all 40 sites added together in 1 month, was less than half of 1%, which is absolutely tiny. So there was a sort of, I guess, a kind of a sense that if attention share and scale was something that the sector wanted, this wasn't something that was happening. And we wanted to kind of try and wonder whether that was a terrible thing. Maybe it wasn't really a surprise. Maybe you're listening to me hear that and say, well, why should these cultural organizations' websites be in the top 40? But I think that there's been a lot of hype around technology as a solution for audience development. And I think that a lot of the research that we've been doing is trying to kind of unpick what's true in that. So we also did, there's another thing, there's another reality check. This is something that the Department of Culture, Media and Sport does in the UK. So all you UK people will know this. It's the Taking Part survey. And they've started tracking online stuff. So this is the growth in museum website visits between 05-06 and 11-12. So these figures show that the traffic, the percentage of the population, this is all done through an online survey. They actually get a kind of demographic of the whole UK population, and they ask them these questions, and they do it repeat them every year. So that shows that the number of people visiting museum websites, heritage websites, and theatre websites has grown between 05-06 and 11-12. So that's great, and they send out press releases that kind of go, isn't this brilliant, and everybody's visiting more websites. However, and I've checked this with them now, they didn't map against that the growth in the percentage of the online UK population that were online. So the last graph I put up, the 22%, that shows you the rate at which the population is growing online. So the number of people online is growing much faster than the number of people visiting our websites. So in actual fact, they're going down. So this is just a kind of a reality check that we are living through this period of where the number of people online is growing so quickly. If we're not growing beyond that, we're actually shrinking. I hope that's clear. Okay. So
yeah, Jane,
back
I'll
to the
just
report.
interrupt there.
Do you want to jump in?
Yeah, Jane, I just want to interrupt there and just someone's asked, what does that 0.04% really represent? What that represents is the attention share for the month that cultural websites, those 40 top cultural websites got from all UK web traffic in that month. So if you think about your own behaviour, your own ways of using the web, you'll probably realise that you don't visit museum websites very often. Even when you work in the sector, that you spend most of your time in Google and Facebook and possibly on Twitter. So the 0.04 is that the total share of all of the users in the UK visiting websites, of all the websites UK people visit in the same period of time. Does that make sense to everybody? Hopefully it does. Jane?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So it was. I think it was a surprise. I mean, that number of people that 0.04 represents is about the same size as a pretty crappy online shopping brand called Littlewoods in the UK. That's the same size as their online shop. That really upsets everybody, that statistic. Anyway, let's look at what this list here is basically, for those of you that have read the report. So this is the key findings from the report. So I think it's worth just spending a moment going back over these, because I think even though this report was nearly 2 years ago now, this stuff is all still very true. And I think this is going to be, some of these things, particularly the first 3, I think are going to be the subject of a lot of our workshop today. So the main thing that came out for everybody is to be clear what you're trying to do online and who it is for. Loads of, it's not enough just to kind of see the web as a place for global access, and that we really need to be kind of targeting and being more focused in sorting and filtering and kind of curating content. Focusing online investment. Some of the research we did mapped sort of the benchmarking we did. We also looked at how much effort people were putting into things, and it didn't always correlate the amount of effort that people put in and the amount of stuff they got back. One of the key findings, which is really not very sexy but is still very true, is that the biggest #1 referrer to most people's sites is still search engines, and very few people spend any money or have strategies for SEO, where everybody's getting strategies for social media or mobile, and the kind of search engine optimization is still a bit of a missing gap. There was also some very interesting stuff that came out of the benchmarking of social media. We did a lot of stuff tracking the difference between popularity and engagement. So when we talk about popularity, we talk about people who come to your website because they've heard of you, so come from a brand search. When we talk about engagement, we're talking more about people who are engaging with content. In social media terms, that popularity might be the number of likes you have, and obviously the engagement is the virality of content. But it was quite interesting to look at. It wasn't the people who were spending the most money on social media were getting the most popularity. They had the biggest teams, they had the biggest marketing budgets, they were getting the most likes. But the people getting the most engagement weren't necessarily the people spending the most money. They were the people who had niche content targeted at niche audiences. Maybe that kind of stuff in retrospect seems obvious, but it isn't always the case, I think, when you're setting out. That it also makes a big difference to what you talk about. There was a lot of stuff around the value and the limits of social media. The Hitwise demographic stuff we did looked at the insights into the demographics, literally the postcodes of the people who were visiting these cultural sites, and it was very clear that the demographic was the kind of classic, I don't know, I can't remember, Seb, do you remember what there was a sort of name for it, and I know they were called Freya, and they had 2 children, and a BMW, and...
Yeah, so it was Johan and Freya were so they used, so Hitwise is owned by Experian, and they used I'll just have to go offline and have a look at what the categories were called. I've got them sitting in my box here. type peoples. But yeah, I mean, really, what the Hitwise data showed once it was the geodemographics were revealed was that these were a very traditional middle class, upper middle class, you know, higher, well-educated or museum audience, the in quotes typical museum visitor. So really the users of the websites were no different to the users of of these very large museums that all of the audience research was showing. It was not as if there was additional diversity coming in as a result of the web. That may be different in social media, and I think it's really important to be thinking about the ways that if diversity is an important thing for your organisation, and I would suggest that probably with the demographic shifts both in North America and Europe and the world as a whole, diversity should be very much part of your concern. That the web and the additional reach the web brings and the additional reach potentially social media brings does not necessarily mean you have more diverse audiences unless you specifically build content and strategies to engage those audiences. What's interesting about that Hitwise data, or really any ISP level data collection service, is that it allows you to also look at where your targeted demographics actually spend most of their time. So it was possible with the Hitwise account to look at where desired audiences spent their time when it wasn't at museum websites. Where did people go instead? So where did they decide to spend their attention?
Yeah.
Jane.
Okay, thank you. So there was a lot of stuff around the value and limits of social media, and that I think a lot of people were hoping that social media was going to drive traffic to their website, that their social media activities would do that, that a lot of people's missions were kind of big overarching things like we want more traffic to our website. And there was no evidence that this is happening. We'll come on to what's happening with the next phase of the research, but this situation hasn't really changed. It's very small numbers of percentages for most people that come back. And there was lots of evidence that there's conversations that stay in the social media channels. And I think maybe there's more awareness of that now than there was 2 years ago, but it's still a very important thing to realize, because as an organization, you need to be thinking about, is that what you want? Do you want those conversations in there, and are they the right conversations? Or do you want the traffic back to your website, and what do you have to do that? So a lot of all these findings are really pinpointing the first point, which is about clarity about what you're doing and who it's for. Because if you have that, all of the other things around online investment or how you use social media channels becomes much clearer. The more specific you can be about all of that. So we, as well as the report, some of you that may have read it, there's some downloadable stuff which is still available. These numbers next to the stuff that was made are the number of times it's been downloaded in the last year. So these have been pretty popular things. The metrics toolkit we're going to talk about on the next slide. The social media tools comparison is completely out of date now, but we are updating that for the research we're doing now. So we will be sharing that in the next couple of months. And that was originally very useful, because there's this plethora of stuff that's out there. We've also shared a lot of Google Analytics segments, and we found these are really helpful because they help people to do benchmarking between organizations, and it gives you some confidence that if you're breaking some confidence around how to start doing segments in Google Analytics. Just simple things like, local, breaking it down into your local city, and looking at the differences in behavior patterns of local people. Are they coming from social media, or are they not coming from social media? Do they share things, do they not share things, as opposed to what happens with visitors from further away. And we also did a lot of health checks, and that, again, that information is shareable and downloadable, and loads of people, I don't think anybody in the first setup had their Google Analytics set up properly, isn't that? And I think even in our second round, people are still doing really obvious things like counting their own traffic and including their own gallery, public usage, and all sorts of crazy stuff. So,
yeah, I would say that, you know, when this report was being done, one of the things that, you know, this is a few years ago now, was that we were, you know, looking at the way people set up their analytics as a very, very early part of the work, and everybody, regardless of institution size or budget, or even you know, IT training, web training, all that sort of stuff, every single institution had very, very poorly set up analytics. So that was really the first part, is to ensure that people actually set up the measurement tools that they had properly. And I was a bit surprised at that, but I think, having now worked with many, many museums and libraries and performing arts orgs all over the world, this is a universal problem. We have a lot of tools available to us, and very, very, very few of them are set up well. That's just the reality, and I hope, you know, sessions like this, as well as face-to-face workshops, help improve that. But generally, that's a common issue. Jane.
Yeah. Well, the good news, I think, is that there is clearly a lot of willingness in the sector to kind of be real about this stuff. I mean, the report, I don't think we had any idea that we were onto something that was going to be so popular. I mean, it's had over 10,000 downloads, which is absolutely amazing. But I think it's just a signifier that people who are actually working on the digital teams in organizations, they know this stuff. They look at the stats. I mean, you guys sort of know it, and it's how do we improve what we're doing and communicate that and drive change internally to make the stuff we do better. Stop doing the stuff that isn't working, and do the stuff that is working better. I talked about the social media metrics toolkit. This, you can download this, but it's actually quite I mean, it was 2 years ago, but it still stands up as quite a useful framework for reporting and monitoring activity against your intention. So if you down the left-hand column, it's across 2 slides at the moment. But the left-hand column, social media community, is the thing that you're trying to do. So if you're trying to build social media community size or interaction or satisfaction, there are a number of different things that you can monitor, and it's just helping set out a sort of framework. And I think this is quite a useful way to think about. There are so many things to measure. You really have to be clear about what you want to do to know which ones are worth measuring and which ones are not worth measuring. If I flick down to the bottom bit, there's things around how do you look for brand perception, how do you look at influence or return on investment. And this is quite a useful thing to look at, as it's giving you all of the kind of different framework for measuring stuff that you then have to go in and weave your way through to find out the stuff that means something to you. So we took those organizations on a journey. I think they all learned a lot. The report and the research in phase 1 was really just benchmarking, and the kind of get real was around the attention share that the sector had being so poor. In 2012, we started again with these people. Some of them are the same. From these organizations, it's a slightly different mix this time. It splits into 3 groups. There's like a third of them are big nationals, a third are museums and galleries, a third are kind of regional museums, galleries, arts venues, and then we had a third who are kind of more performing arts based venues. So we had quite a mixed group, and that dynamic's quite interesting because people have very different objectives and very different ways of doing things, and there's a lot of insight that comes from the way that larger organizations can try things out and move quicker, but smaller organizations often have to be very fleet of foot. They often are more specialist or more regional in their nature, and they sometimes have a simpler offer around a certain subject that they can own. And there's, you begin to sort of see patterns around different types of stuff. So we did all the health checks again, and we did segmentation again because people were still getting it wrong 2 years later. And we looked at a lot of benchmarking tools, and we started tracking. People were really interested in mobile change, and we started looking at the growth of visitors to our website or our sites from mobile devices. So this is the growth percentage of mobile visits to the whole site and the change from the previous year. So there's an average of, I think it's about 150% growth in 1 year. And this was from 2011 to 2012. Now this phase 2 is just finished, and we've benchmarked the growth again. So from the 10 months from when we did this to see if it's still growing, and unsurprisingly, it is still growing. There's another 20, it's averaging around 20 to 30% now for organizations, and here the average was about 18. And we kind of agreed as a group of organizations that if you were getting 20% of your traffic from mobile devices, then that, and you didn't have any strategy for mobile, that you needed to sort that out. That you were in trouble, and you had a user group that were probably having a pretty crap experience. So we looked at the mobile growth, and we've gone back in again with doing some benchmarking on social media. We're working with a PhD student this time, and her research is going to be published when the next report comes out, which is going to be in September. So I can't give you all of the details of that, but I can give you some of the highlights of what she's looked at, and it's not particularly good news. The sort of average engagement rate on Facebook is round about 3.7%. So the number of people who are engaging in stuff averaging around 3.7%. About 1.5% of people are talking on average, talking about your stuff. So there's a lot of activity that is within the organization's own channel is low levels of engagement. Maybe that's okay. Maybe that's fine. Maybe they're not putting a lot of effort into it. I don't know, but it's a sort of it's interesting to reflect on what you want from your channel and what people are actually getting. Twitter virality even lower. The number of posts that get reposted and stuff was on average less than 0.5%. And there was big gaps between the different kinds of content. So she's doing quite a detailed sentiment analysis of different types of content that people post, what kinds of content are more viral, what kinds of content are spread, talked about. And the kinds of posts that most of the organizations in the research do are about events and exhibitions. And the kinds of things that are most viral and shared are not events and exhibitions. They're user-generated stuff, they're pictures, they're kind of competitions and stuff. So there's a mismatch between the stuff that's coming out of organizations and what users are wanting. Loads more of that coming when the research comes out, and we're really excited by having Elena, who's based at the University of Leicester, working with us on the project. Seb, do you want to add anything about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think even the very first report really did show that so social media was not effective at driving at supporting very traditional goals. for museums, and I think that's been one of the interesting things to come out of this work. But also, generally, when we talk about social media, we often we think of it purely in terms of reach. We think about, wow, we're growing our audiences, etc., etc. We're not actually directly tying it to a purpose. And when we start to get staff at museums thinking about the actual purpose of each post to social media, it starts to become quite rubbery. And we start thinking about engagement in these extremely rubbery terms, not engagement for specific people even, but just people will be engaged with us. Then fortunately now, Facebook has in its own metrics package, which is part of your administrator account on Facebook, is the actual number of people who potentially saw your Facebook post, and you'll see that that's a minute subgroup of your total fans, followers, etc. Because of course not everybody is looking at Facebook who follows you at the exact time you post your thing, and then Facebook also now does its own internal ranking. So these sorts of things mean that even if you have in some of the institution's cases that were part of the Culture 24 project, 1 million or more followers, fans, etc., that it may be less kind of than 1,000 people out of that million who in fact have any chance of seeing what you've done. And what if all of those 1,000 people happen to be tourists who visited your museum on their holiday three years ago and became fans then? It's not like they disappear from being fans. So these sort of things, when you start to look at the actual data, become increasingly troubling, I think, for museums. And I do get the sense that often in the non-profit sector, we've seen social media as a magic bullet for many of our larger problems. And of course, we're now realizing it's not. That doesn't mean we shouldn't engage with it or use it, of course, but that we need to be more tactical about it and really look at what it is we're trying to do. So Jane, do you want to go on? I've got some slides to drill down further into that we can switch to at any time. We've also got those polls we could pop up as well. But why don't you keep on going?
Let's do a poll. Let's do a poll.
So let's do, okay, we're going to pop up a few polls here. So Susan, is it possible to expand that one out a bit? Because there's a few that we can't see there. There we go. Now you'll notice we're asking you here what social media platforms your organisation uses. And you'll see towards the bottom that we also have things like TripAdvisor and Yelp. And in many ways that these are the sort of sites that can actually help you a lot, potentially more than others. I'm interested to see that no one is using Quora. That's kind of cool. Yes, someone mentioned we should have added Vine, but yes. Let me see here.
Look at all those people using Google+. I didn't think anybody used Google+. That's really interesting.
There's a few that we didn't add
YouTube.
yet.
Somebody said, yeah, YouTube, yeah.
Instagram, etc.
Instagram, yeah. LinkedIn. Yeah, well, LinkedIn is sector-facing, I would say, and we're kind of talking about what I would call public-facing. But that's a very good point, because I think there's a lot of evidence that we are the audience of each other's stuff. that a lot of the people, we're lurking around each other's Facebook pages, we're reading each other's tweets, we're looking at each other's museum websites, and maybe that's not a bad thing, but it's something to be aware of. Okay. Seb, shall I carry on and talk about the internal reporting stuff?
Yeah, let me just, maybe Susan, we can just pop the other polls up as well. I'd be interested to see how those look as well. So this one's now asking, if we can just expand that a little bit too, this one's asking how many people are responsible for posting content to social media. Some of the institutions in the Culture 24 project had between 0 and 1 to 25 plus staff. Posting and managing, of course, are different, and you might have all of your curatorial staff blogging for you and that. So I'll let you read that the way you wish. Also, the other one about strategies. I'm interested. I'm pleased to see that the content strategy is starting to emerge as an important thing. That is increasingly, I think, what we're seeing is that a content strategy for the whole organization is incredibly important. Depending on what you're trying to do with this stuff, again, it really does concern who and what. And I see in the comments here, LinkedIn is public-facing, links to media releases, these sorts of things. This is interesting to see in the back channel.
Define
okay,
strategy.
cool.
I think the strategy poll leads nicely onto the stuff about reporting.
Okay.
Could you bring the slides back, Susan? Thank you. Okay, so Elena, who's worked on the first research and the second research and has a PhD, has somewhere through the first research started working at the Tate, got herself a job, and as far as I know, she's the only person. You can tell me if any of you have somebody like this now. She's the only person in a big museum or gallery whose job is solely to do analytics and reporting. I don't know if anybody, that's all she does. She does it 3 days a week for the Tate. And she's done a lot of work on the best ways to do that, the best metrics to include. The reports that she does go out internally. And a lot of the lessons that have come through the research, a lot of people are interested in the people who are taking part in our research. They want to know how they can take information back to their managers to illustrate points, to drive change, to make arguments for investments, to kind of, and a lot of people are saying things like, well, it's great that we're starting to have a digital strategy. It's great that we're starting to think about all of that stuff, but really what we need to do is get digital out of its box and get it into the heart of the organization and make it really about content and engagement and audiences. And digital is just a tactic for doing that. And when people are able to start to do that, when they're reporting the digital activities against the overall mission of the organization, things start to get very interesting. So Elena's done a lot of stuff on reporting. Some of you may have seen a paper she did at Museums on the Web. You can go and read this. It's really interesting. This was from 2012 Museums on the Web, but it's about that internal journey that Tate's been going through, looking at analytics. They messed about in the paper with this dashboard, which they created as a kind of bespoke dashboard for their Alice in Wonderland exhibition. And I think in their words, they sort of measured everything to death. And they created this internal dashboard, which then was shared around within the organization, so people could have some sense of what was going on. And this wasn't just Google Analytics. This was pulling information out of Twitter and Facebook and making it into one dashboard. So it's a sort of it's a combined set. It's a mix of stuff, which is obviously very time consuming to create. And obviously because she was in post at Tate to do that, she was able to have that luxury, which a lot of organizations don't have, to do that. But it's a really nice example of a kind of narrative combined with analytics. It's telling a story for internal reporting. She's now moved on to this kind of summary of report, and again, this is on 2 slides, so I'm just going to flick between them. Well, it's on 3 actually. So there's different elements to this report. It starts with a narrative that she writes. It's pulling in stuff from Google Analytics around visitors, unique visitors, and this is like a kind of basic Google Analytics dashboard that's been customized, but she's pulling in stuff from other places as well. So there's e-commerce stuff that's being pulled in here. There's also all of their e-newsletters, reports, their social media, and what's going on their app store. So she's plugged in a lot of different metrics that through consultation and working with her team are reporting against the things that they are important to them. So it's kind of deciding what it is that's of value to you. How does value express itself? How do you measure that? And let's report on that. It doesn't mean you have to report on everything. But it's reporting on the things that have value to you. She's actually made a social media dashboard, which I think which is a Google Analytics shareable thing, which I think we can share, can't we, Seb?
I'll show that a little bit later. Yeah, I'll show that a little bit later,
Yeah.
Jane. I mean, I was going to add to that I think what's really nice about the Tate reports is that they are designed to be readable and usable by as many staff as possible. If you're reporting and if your data is not easily presentable to others without technical knowledge or who don't get the web, then its value is immensely reduced. So in fact, having less data and presenting it better is often more valuable to the organization as a whole. It also gets a lot more buy-in and diverts the questions around. So why are we spending so much money on X or Y? And you should be able to say, well, this is why, because our investment of having X amount of time spent doing Twitter or Facebook or on our website or writing these blog posts or creating this video on YouTube that got seen by 50 people is this, and we know that because X, Y, Z. That sort of narrative is increasingly important. Also, I would say that it also forces everybody in the institution to realize that not every visitor or user of your material is of equal value, let's say. And Colleen Dillon did a really nice and succinct post about that this morning, in fact. I'll just send that link around in the back channel. But this was a really nice piece from Colleen that really started to talk about understanding the difference between different segments in your audience and their value to you in propagating what you're trying to do, or their propensity to share, or their propensity to promote your service, exhibits, products, exhibitions, whatever they might be, to others. So that post from Colleen is really great. And is really, I mean, for me, that sort of stuff is, I would argue, the basics of just good marketing. And, there's a lot of people in the non-profit world who are pushing very hard on the reality that often the level of marketing skill and professionalism within the non-profit and cultural sector is not as good as in other sectors. Trevor O'Donnell has a quite interesting book an ebook and also a blog where he republishes a lot of his work, which is very critical of the cultural sector marketing. I've just sent around the link, and I think having a read through his work and Colleen Dillon's work and many other people's work is just a useful reminder that we have to be continually skilling up in this sort of stuff and understanding how the different parts of the organisation work together to serve the mission. Now, if that mission isn't clear and no one understands that mission in a coherent way, then we have a bigger institutional problem, and that's something none of us can separately solve, but we can collectively solve that. And I think that's been what's been coming out of the Culture 24 work too, is that as the work has gone on, and this second phase has been looking a lot at social media stuff and the mobile stuff, institutions are realising this is everything now. Digital isn't going away, and we've just seen the Tate, John kind of stack at the Tates just released their new digital strategy, and you can see that the Tate is now moving away from this sense of digital as a separate thing to digital affects everything we do, and we need to take it seriously, and that in some cases might mean you don't have a department for it, but that you have cross-functional teams. And if you're in a volunteer-run museum, that's going to sound utterly ridiculous because you're a staff of 2 or 0. So anyway, Jane.
Okay, so we got like 5 more minutes. I'm just going to finish the story of the phase 2 of the research and talk to you. I mentioned the mobile benchmarking we did. We've talked a little bit about the social media stuff. But we also did, we looked at motivation. We started to try, people were interested in finding out what brought people to their site. So we did, we based something on the work of Rob Stein, who's, I'm sure most of you will have heard of, or maybe some of you know, who's now at Dallas Museum of Art. And he'd been doing, did a paper, again at Museums on the Web, you can go and read this, around exploring the relationship between motivation and engagement. And he was looking at the work of John Falk and looking at Falk's idea of an entrance narrative into a museum. And he used the sort of Falk model of the entrance narrative, which is kind of very simple, quite easy to understand. It's sort of well tested in the museum community. He used that to create a baseline motivational survey. And what we did in our research is we emulated and copied what he wrote about and did within this paper. So we used an online survey tool called Quarreloo. And we basically put on all 22 of the partner websites a 1-question survey that visitors were asked when they came to the site. They basically had to pick one motivation for their visit. And they picked them from this choice of 5. And that 5 is based on the kind of Falk model of interactions with museums. And what Rob was trying to do, and what we were trying to do, is explore this idea of an online narrative. You know, what brings people to your site? What do they think? What do they come for? And then what do they go and do? So we had the data from the motivational survey that said why people had come to the site, and then what we did is we mapped using a Google Analytics code to follow the user so that we could see, did the people who planned a visit, what pages did they then go and look at? Were they looking at the Visit Us pages? So we mapped their journey using Google Analytics through the website. So you could see the people coming for professional reasons, were they looking at the professional resources area of people's websites or not? Were people looking to make a transaction able to find shops? So we mapped the motivational survey, what people came to do against what they actually did. Here's the kind of the little grey box here in the bottom right is what the survey looks like when it pops up. It was up for 3 months over the beginning of the year. There it is on the Tate and National Gallery of Scotland. And this is slightly hard to read, I think, maybe in full screen. This is the breakdown of the results, which for some organizations was not a surprise, but for a lot of people was. High proportions of professional visitors,
Yep.
people coming looking for professional stuff.
So,
And
so I should just interrupt here, Jane. Let me just explain a little bit about this. I mean, I think what I'm seeing in the back channel is this sort of let me go back a little bit. So what the Qualaroo survey did, Qualaroo, which used to be called KISS Insights, which is something I used a lot of at the Powerhouse, is a little pop-up Q&A tool, and it's a very non-intrusive one. It only pops up a maximum of two questions, and you can target it to specific parameters, people who visit your page a certain amount of times, or spend a certain amount on a page, or come in through a particular search term. So what Qualaroo is being used here to do is to ask visitors to a website, what are they trying to do? Now, because Qualaroo is such a small, unobtrusive pop-up, it's not like some of the other tools in that it takes over the whole screen. It's a discrete pop-up that you get very high take-up rates. Lots and lots of people answer the Qualaroo surveys. I'll just put the name of it in the back channel. Someone asked what it is. What's interesting about that is the volume of respondents is very high. So what happens with the Qualaroo data is that it allows you in GA, in Google, to segment the people who responded in a particular way in Qualaroo to actually what they did in your website. So someone might say they are coming to plan a visit but the survey pops up. But then what do they really do? And that's what Rob's paper and his work at the IMA was looking at, and that is what was replicated in the UK work. So we're using two different tools and tracking what people say they want to do with what they actually do.
Yeah, and the reason for doing that is to try and give each individual organization some framework where they can ask a question that they can get an actionable insight out of it. So what we did when we got all this data is we gave each organization back a package of information and said, look at this, frame some questions around this, look for something in here, pick a segment, identify an attribute that's underperforming, find a metric that's associated with that behavior, and see if you can find a way to improve it. So what we were trying to do is give people a framework to make an actionable insight so they could do something and then see what impact it had. So this is getting really specific into kind of what are they trying to do and who is it for, and they have to, in making that actionable insight, be as specific as possible. So they've got to look at, some people looked at, referrals, and that one of the segments about where people were coming from. They looked at traffic types. They looked at different types of content pages. They looked at exit pages. They looked at landing pages. And each of the organizations went away and did their own kind of mini bit of research out of the overall research. And they've done some testing. So some of the organizations have done some really nice stuff, actually playing with with what I guess you would call A and B testing. So looking at a page that was underperforming, so thinking about people who are planning a visit, and then the journey that they take on, and a page on that visit that isn't leading to them going and booking something, or looking at more, maybe they're only looking at one page, and what they want to do is get them to look at other exhibitions that are on or other things to visit. How can you promote what content on a page in a different way? So looking at A and B testing around that, looking at how you make content that's more shareable, getting people to share stuff off of your site back into their own networks. really trying to get every organization into the mind space of, okay, I get it, all right, so I really, the people who are coming for professional reasons are not looking at this fantastic part of the site that we've built for professionals, and what am I going to do about that? That's the kind of, that kind of thing is you can see that you can identify a page that's not working and do something about it.
Yeah, I mean,
so, do you think we should bring in our victims, or do you want to
no,
a bit more?
I think I'm going to jump out to my slides if that's possible, Susan, just as an interruption here, because I think really what the Culture 24 stuff's been about, and what I've been doing in all the things I've been doing with museums over however long, is really looking at measurement and evaluation and data analysis as a key part of decision making, and that is very, very, very hard to do. Everybody uses the rhetoric of being data kind of driven, or even better, data informed, which you don't want to be just purely driven by data, but you want to be informed by it so you make better decisions. Is that very, very few people actually do that. And that is not because the data isn't available. It's usually because the human interpersonal skills in the organisation are just not very good. But this is not a problem unique to us. And in fact, I would say because we work in the cultural sector, we should be better at this. We might not be so good at the data part, but we should be a lot better at the interpersonal stuff. So here's just the sort of basic things that I push in everything we do, and this is what I was also pushing throughout the Culture 24 work with these institutions, is that you need to be changing, rather than looking at it as, do we have a way of measuring Twitter? Do we have a way of measuring Facebook? Do we have a way of measuring how many tickets we sell? Do we have a way of measuring X or Y? Is realizing and understanding and thinking about what is the data we need to get to find out the things we need to know to make the changes we collectively agree we should make for the long-term health of our organisation. So these are the key questions that everybody should ask of all the things they do, whether this is their Twitter account, whether this is the microsite that Director X or Y has said, we need a microsite for this exhibition, or whether what's in the email broadcast you're about to send out through MailChimp. It doesn't matter what you're doing. You need to ask and collectively agree on the answers to these questions. What are you actually trying to do? Who are you really trying to reach? And you have to be very, very precise here. Now, fortunately, with audience segmentation in a lot of the broadcasting tools we have, things such as targeted advertising on the web, we can get very, very precise. Things like MailChimp broadcasts, we can get very, very precise if we have done proper segmentation. What we can't do very well is understand that if we place an ad in the New York Times, we have a broad sense of who reads the Times, and we get told that millions and millions and millions of people will see our ad, which we know is not true. We know millions and millions of people read the New York Times, but they won't necessarily read our ad or even see it, let alone act on it. One of the beautiful things about digital is it allows you to tie the action to to the audience size. So being precise here is super important. Now, you probably want to do this when you're buying a billboard ad as well, or whatever other display-based ads you're doing. But the thing is, often we don't ask these same questions of those things. So if we move on, and then, and only then, when you've figured out what you're really trying to do and who it is for, can kind of you start to think about how will you know it's worked? How do you know that your tweet today was effective? If you haven't said what success looks like before you do that tweet, it's not an experiment. It's just throwing things out into the wind, which for most of us is fine because we're trying to learn these platforms. But we do need, if we're going to do measurement and metrics, to have some markers of success. We need to be able to benchmark ourselves. And on that note, what happened to my slide? Then we start to look at what are the best methods we can use to measure it. Because unfortunately, we have so many different tools available to us. There are some times when we will find that the methods, that the ways we need to measure it are not served by the tools that we have available, despite having lots and lots of tools. Importantly too, it's really good to know your comparative data, and this is where the Culture 24 work, and to be honest, any collaborative work is valuable. When you can say, I am a museum that has this, and we have a budget of that, and we're trying to reach X audience or Y audience, and the same audience is trying to be reached by person Z, company X, whatever, you can start to look at how you compare with them rather than comparing small museum with enormous museum. We can't all be the Tate. We can't all be the Smithsonian, the Louvre, the British Museum. Indeed, as the Culture 24 work shows, that often it is not museums who are our competitors, but other things that are pushing for attention. All sorts of educational services, leisure services, media generally. The biggest issue is attention and time. So after you've done that, and after you've got the answers to all those questions down on a piece of paper or a whiteboard or a series of post-it notes, whatever your best organizational decision-making tools involve, then the next two questions that are critical to answer are these. What insights are you gaining from the data you collect? And secondly, are you implementing changes as a result of it? If you don't gain useful stuff from your data, you're collecting the wrong things, and you need to rethink your methods. And this is where so many of the free and, to be honest, the paid social media measurement tools are useless. Social media metrics tools are often developed for different sectors that are not ours, and the insights that they provide are not always relevant to our sector, and we need to be thinking about that. Just because it's free doesn't really mean it's free. There is no free. Free in money, perhaps. Free in time, no. And I think, again, in the not-profit world, we neither have money nor time. So we need to be really cautious about how we spend our money, but also the way how we spend our time. And if the tools we have and use do not give us useful data, we should move on to other tools. And this is, I think, what you see with the Tate, with their new reporting structure, their new reporting templates, is that they have changed the way their reports look, so they can be acted upon broadly, and changes can actually be made. And this is a long, struggle for museums. This is not a thing that a 2-hour on kind of line seminar thing will resolve for you. And as you know, someone's asking in the back channel, what is the best tool? Then the best tool is one that you use that gives you the answers to the things you need to know and your institution acts on. So
I think we need to bring in our guinea pigs.
these are the different categories of tools you have available for you, right? And this is the general gist of your toolkit. There's these 5 different types of tools, or broad categories of tools that you can choose from. Site-based user metrics, so this is tools like Google and GA. And the thing with GA is that it allows you to improve your user experience of the people that come to your website now. It does not measure people who do not come to your website. It only catches people who do come to your website. Similarly, this does allow, in many cases, the opportunity to find new audiences that you don't have. The interaction metrics, again, this allows you to deploy tools on your site to look at the way people use specific parts of your site. GA, for example, will not tell you necessarily, without some additional setup, how many people watched the video on page X all of the way through it. They may show you the people who loaded the page that happened to have the video on it, and potentially the people who started watching it, but necessarily the people who finished watching it. So the ISP level metrics are the next level up. These are products like Hitwise that allow you to find comparative data and spot the macro trends across website usage in general. This allows you importantly to see the patterns of web use beyond your own website. It shows you potentially the other websites your kind of visitors look at as well, and the amount of time they spend on those and other things, because your ISP, your internet service provider, is captures all of its subscribers' website usage. So if that doesn't make sense, hit us up in the chat window. The next layer up is, of course, all these social media tools, right? So what's interesting about the social media world, to me, is it does allow you to get some better idea of the fuller life your users have, or people who engage with your brand or identity have. It doesn't necessarily give you a full picture, but there are some useful tools in there. Some of the demographic stuff, some of the sentiment analysis stuff, and again, it depends service to service. Facebook will give you broad demographics. TripAdvisor will generally tell you about the people who have a terrible experience at your museum and that you need to have better food in the cafe and clean your toilets more. Those are useful things, and they give a fuller picture of the life of your users and visitors. The other thing social media does quite well is to show the topics and subjects, particularly that are currently resonating with your audiences. And if you can start to feed those back to curatorial staff and education staff and exhibit planners and these sorts of people, you can suddenly start to look at, here are some things that we know a lot about that it seems our audience is quite interested in too, and maybe we should be using that to think about new exhibitions we might do, or a new talk series, or new events, this sort of stuff. It might also reveal simply that cat images are very popular on the internet. So you need to be cautious of the bias that social media will actually provide you. And again, remembering that if you are, say, the MoMA or the Tate or the Met, you probably, or let's say the MoMA, if you are the MoMA or the Met, you might have a very large amount of international tourists, and they may be becoming fans or followers of you for a small period of time when they are trying to find out what's on. They may also be becoming a friend or fan or follower simply as a way of creating or shaping their own social identity. So social media tools are used by people, ourselves included, to create and present ourselves, a version of ourselves, not necessarily our real self. Should a real self really exist? Social media is about presentation of self. And that, as Dana points out, your content strategy can flow from that. So then, the final one, of course, is the most important one. Qualitative research. Qualitative research is extremely expensive generally, and but extremely valuable. And one of the things that I've done in my work in museums is to use the quantitative tools we have to better inform the qualitative research we need to now do. So by that I mean the audience research we need to do can now be better informed by the quantitative research. So this is also where Rob Stein's been going. What does our quantitative data show us? And then what are the things the quantitative data doesn't kind of tell us, and how can I deploy my very scant and expensive qualitative research resources to go and find the answers to that. The other thing it's important to realize with all of this, it is incredibly time sensitive. Time sensitive really means that you need to be looking at the patterns. You can't make good decisions when you're looking at month by month data. You need to be looking at the bigger shifts, and these shifts in our sector may be 12, 24 to 24 months long, maybe more. How frequently do average visitors to your museum become repeat visitors? Do you get people who come to your early childhood programs weekly? They exhibit a very different behaviour to the international tourists who may come once every five or 10 years, or once in a life. In terms of the Smithsonian, I think a large portion of the visitors who come to our museums in Washington come three times in a life. Once as a child, once as a parent, once as a grandparent. That's a very different sort of engagement, and that time scale of engagement is one we need to keep in mind. So what's interesting with social media is we want to look at who is really engaging with us frequently, and are those people the same people who happen to be walking in our doors and coming to our public programs frequently? How else are they engaged with us is one thing. The second thing we may want to know is, are those people promoters of us to people who do actually engage with us in other ways? So, for example, Cooper Hewitt at the moment has a bunch of active fans and promoters in New Zealand. Now that's awesome. Being a New Zealander, that's even more awesome. But what's interesting about our New Zealand fans is those New Zealand fans have communicate their sort of enthusiasm for us to others who actively engage with us, who are New Yorkers or who are local. So we need to, you know, the rhetoric around global audiences and all of this sort of stuff is really nice, but there comes a time when we need these people to argue, to engage with us in a very locally specific way, and that's what I think we'll start to see in the digging into the case kind of studies. So yeah, so Jane, back to you. I need to grab a drink of water.
People are asking some questions about specific examples, so I think while Seb's having a drink, I can give you a couple of examples of things that people are doing in some of the UK organisations with all that data that they've got back out of Quarraloo. So one of the things that the Science Museum have been looking at is traffic from StumbleUpon. Really, lots of big spikes, and they've been trying to analyse the kinds of stuff that gets shared and seeing if there is some way that they can replicate that. I think one of the challenges is that often the stuff that's shared isn't the stuff that they necessarily want to share. So again, that creates kind of questions for them about whether it's worth the effort. They've also been looking at Wikipedia and video clips, and they've done some stuff changing licenses in their video clips and generated huge spikes in visitor traffic. So just some examples of some specific things that people have done, having developed some insights out of data. Are you back with us, Seb?
Yes, I'm back.
He's not there? Good.
Yeah, I'm back.
I think we're going to bring in our guinea pigs now. I think they're chomping at the bit to have us put up their stats for everybody to pore over.
All right. So, should we start with SF MoMA? Maybe. SF MoMA,
Okay.
you there? So,
They will need
tell
to just unmute.
us a little bit about your. Hello. Tell us a little bit about your museum.
One moment, please. We're just reconfiguring our sound. We can't put on speaker, so you might not be able to hear. Hi there. Sorry, can you repeat the question?
Tell us a little bit about your museum and what's happening. Who are they? What are you? Who are you for? Who visits you? All that sort of stuff. What's your organizational mission?
Okay, so, well, that's a big question. But yeah, we're in San Francisco right now, and we are actually less than a month away from closing our doors to our current building because we're about to start an expansion project. And we'll be closed for 2.5 years, so we're currently in the process of kind of trying to rethink a little bit of our digital strategy and website, and we just launched a new redesign to try and drive more traffic back to our very rich multimedia offerings and kind of the depths of our website that don't get seen very often unless their content is surfaced through social media. So I guess just in terms of our demographic, we have a very traditional museum demographic. We have kind of the mid-age range, a lot of locals and a lot of tourists. But we see that more of our web traffic does come, you know, we're getting a more diverse audience to our website, I believe, than who are actually coming through our museum doors. So, yeah.
Does that bear itself out in your Facebook demographics? So
yeah,
if I log into your Facebook account now, would I see that your audience research from the people who walk in your door or your donors or this sort of stuff, are those demographics reflected in what you see, or are you seeing new opportunities in your data, from your Facebook data?
I think what a lot of people would see, the Facebook and our other demographics on other social media channels skew younger than our visitors that come through our doors. I think that's just a usage trend with social media in general. But yeah, are you going to pull up the demographic info?
Yeah, I'm just going to switch over to that now. Susan, can you pop up a new share for me, and I'm going to try and share this window. Let's see if this works. Thank you. So just hold tight, peoples. Just trying to share this. Sorry, it's slightly complicated, this bit. All right, let's see what happens now.
If you're interested, if SF MoMA are interested, your Facebook likes are kind of similar size to the Welcome Collection in the UK.
Oh, good. Yeah, and we have kind of diversified.
You know, in terms of where, it's kind of interesting where people are.
Yeah, so sorry, I see someone was asking, who is this from SF MoMA? I'm Willa, I'm the Digital Engagement Associate, so I pretty much just manage our social media and work a little bit on other digital initiatives around the museum. And I also have Peter Samus here. Probably a lot of you know of him already. And we have Bridget Carberry, who works on our web team.
Yay, there we go. We can look at this, and audience, if you want to see this full screen, there is a little button at the top for full screen toggle on. You can do that. You won't be able to see the chat at the same time. So if you want to ask a question in the chat, then just escape, come back, ask the question. Seb, are you still with us? I know that Willa and Bridget are still on the phone, but Seb, we're not hearing you right now. Although I do hear you typing.
Maybe he cut something off.
And we see his mouse moving.
And we see him moving. Well, we did see him.
That was me typing, telling him we can't hear him.
Okay.
Sorry, thanks for sharing it. You can hear me now? Can you hear me now? Yeah. Good. That is good.
Now the buzzing has stopped. We can hear you.
Good. But you can't see any screens now. Yes. That's
well, right. The screen is covered by something big and blocking.
Hold on.
It looks like there's a Google Analytics page underneath, whatever is over top of it. When you're screen sharing and you go to a page, if there's a pop-up on top of that, the audience cannot see it. And now, so you're resharing now.
Yeah.
I feel like a
now
baseball.
Should be able to see. That's right, sorry. So people should now be able to hear me, yes, and see the screen.
Yes.
This is good.
No.
Oh, except I can't now do... Right. All right, so let's see if this works. So is there any new insights you're getting? Do you look at this frequently? Do you dump out the data with this feature here to extract it and look at changes in these demographics and location through time? Because really that's where I think you will get some additional value from this, is seeing how these demographics shift. Is any of that being done?
Seb, your audio went to a high-pitched whine.
This is very, really? Should not be as complicated as it is.
Maybe if it's
is the audio better now?
Yep.
Okay. So, do you use this data to help inform and target? Do you match this data against anything else?
No, I mean, we are struggling to kind of keep up with the mass influx of data that we are kind of keeping track of. Like I'll do a mass export of data, but for me it's a lot more right now archival than than actionable. Like that's kind of the reason I was actually interested in being part of this discussion, because we're kind of in the same, timing. It seems a lot of you are trying to figure out a way to comprehensively kind of include a lot of different digital data in a way that makes sense to the rest of the museum as well. So we want to figure out like the best analytics or the best data points to track so that we can write that narrative and share it with the rest of the museum in a way that they will be getting something useful out of it. So we kind of, seem to be waffling. Like we were definitely tracking followers manually across all of our different social media platforms and doing engagement based on different campaigns, but not like holistically. So I would be curious, to hear from you what you're thinking are key points of this data to be, pulling out, and how you would go about doing that.
Okay, well, I think there's two things out of this, the insights here that Facebook gives us. One is the sort of general demographic change through time of who's becoming who is becoming a fan on Facebook. The second is in this talking about this, which starts to look at who is engaging with your content in a particular period of time, and this is where you begin to be able to align your content strategy with your content you're making in your strategy with the audiences that it's targeted at. So you can see the difference here between reach. So the reach is here 55% female, 43% male, 16% say male in the 25 to 34s for that month. But in the people who talk about you, it is skewed much more female. So what sort of things did you post in that period, and what audiences were you actively trying to target with those posts? This is where you won't necessarily reveal the right or wrong thing immediately, but you'll start to see patterns, and you will begin to start to segment the types of things you post about. So content like this sort of art seems to get more reaction from people aged this versus this sort of art which skews that. This should also match against your long kind of term exhibit visitation data too. Certain types of exhibition are put on and are successful with particular parts of your broad audience. This is where you can start to do that with your the content on Facebook. The other thing you can look at here is experimenting with that and seeing whether any of your experiments really do have an impact, and whether these figures shift. It also allows you to start thinking about which of your fans here are really continuously engaged versus one engaged for a week here because they happen to be in the Bay Area and potentially visiting, so they became a fan just for that period of time. So that's where you start to be able to use this data to more tactically deploy things to change this. But this requires getting this data out to more people, the education staff, the curatorial staff, maybe also the security guards, all this sort of stuff, that people who are engaged with visitors or with the things you talk about frequently. You may also find that your style is of a particular, or your tone of voice has a particular appeal, and you may play around with that tone, particularly while you're closed, to see if it begins to shift and whether there are new opportunities emerging from that. But as I say, this is the longer term trend sort of data you need to be thinking about. But it sounds like you are, and it's how it is presented. I think what Elena from the Tate would say is that she and the rest of her teams were really played around with a number of different styles and formats of presenting data before you ended up with one that's right. There is no, there's no magic pony for data presentation. Now there are a bunch of services that do automate the generation of reports, but it doesn't necessarily mean they're right for you or right for the sort of stuff you're trying to do. So I would generally say pull the data out to spreadsheets and then use tools in Excel to data mine it a little bit, and then extract that, build out narrative about it, and frame a series of experiments. The other thing that I would be interested in with SF MoMA's data is if one of the aims of their Facebook page here, we go to the Facebook page here, we see, are they posting links? Yes, there is a link here, right? So we see here that they've posted what should be a pretty viral piece of material. Cat in it, it's on the internet, it's got a number of likes. Who are these people who have liked it? How many people have seen it? Does that is that growing? How many times has it been shared? This is pretty good. I would think, how would you compare this against another museum that's recently shared cats, like the Walker? Possibly. How are they going? Then I would go to GA and look at the data of how much traffic followed this link. So I'm just going to follow that link and let's see where it ends up. So this links to this page here, a blog post on the SF MoMA site. Now we can see we've had all those people commenting in Facebook, but if we go down here, we're like, wow, all of these people have liked and done all this, but I don't have any comments on the original blog post. Well, maybe that's because the comments have already occurred in the other place. So that's sort of where you need to be thinking about what was the purpose of Chris Cobb, author here, writing this piece and spending that amount of time with it. But I can now look at this URL and I can go to your GA stats and start to look at that content and think about, did the people who get to it come, where did the people who, so I'm just going to actually, do we have in here an easy way to find the blog stuff? SF MoMA people? Or is that in a different account?
If you one of the words in, no, it should be in there. If you search for one of the words in the blog post title, it should be.
Okay, so it's 2013. Okay, so we're in here and we're starting to drill down. So this is May, so again, we probably just want to shorten this time period because obviously the May blog post would have only happened there. Here we are at this one, 208 views, and then we can start to look at how people got into this, traffic sources. So we see that so we have had 56 page views from Facebook, plus another 6 from mobile. Feedly sent a bunch. Twitter sent us 35. Now this is kind of amusing because you'll see that we've had quite a lot more likes than views from Facebook, and this is not uncommon. But you know, this is also where, and we saw this in the Culture 24 work, that the behaviour of people in Facebook is that we might like links or comment on links. It doesn't actually mean suffer from this, and I think the Culture 24 work again did show that there was not a one-to-one relationship click-throughs and Facebook likes, and in fact often the likes would be click-throughs. Similarly with Twitter, we might get a lot of retweets, but not necessarily the traffic coming through to us, and that becomes challenging. How do you deal with that? One of the ways perhaps is to think about the content in those channels, so Facebook and Twitter, as carrying more of itself in those places, so it doesn't matter if they don't click through. But if you are if
yeah, I would add
the
to
value for moment. Sorry, you dropped off there.
I was just going to add that for us, not. Can you hear me? I was just going to add that for us, it's not always the end goal is not always to get the click through. We, for example, with this post, it's not. I don't know. I just don't feel like driving traffic back to our website is always the #1 priority with every post.
So okay, so I am paying money
Sorry, your audio.
for Chris Cobb to be engaged with this. Chris, his time to write this post, and it's had 208 through time, and the long tail value of this is high. What is the other explicit value that SF MoMA identifies by having this post up on its
Sorry, can you say your audio?
Facebook wall? What does this communicate about SF MoMA?
I mean, that's a good question. I think in the case of this post, it
so
was like
other
kind of an
other
obvious
than clicking through.
because it's a cat. So we're
Yep. Okay. Okay. Hey, Peter. Yeah.
back on to talk a little bit more about the background of that, and then see if we can understand anything from the analytics during that period to see if there was any response that's visible in the stats. How's that?
So I think that is excellent, and I think I think that was what I was getting at with that, was the value of the cat is not necessarily that it resulted in click-through, but you need to understand clearly what it is about. And I think it is about changing and experimenting with the tone of your site and the tone of your brand. Your brand identity shifts as soon as you start posting cats. But that's something that you need to be explicit about, because internally that can be very hard to argue for resource unless it's articulated as a distinctive strategy or a method, tactic. You're trying to change the human face of SF MoMA, so we're going to do these experiments with slow art. We're going to do these experiments with cats on our Facebook wall. These are targeted at our existing audiences to change their perceptions of SF MoMA, and I'm going to measure that by X, Y, and Z. Now, X, Y, and Z may be, 6 months later, something else has happened or changed. That's the sort of thing. I think so. I would agree that the click-throughs are not necessarily the best measure, but because everybody knows that the data that you can get access to does show that, that's what they're going to ask for, unless you are specific about saying the other thing it's about, which is not about the click-throughs at all, but is about tone and brand and mind share and all that sort of stuff. Yeah?
So how would you define X, Y, in terms of measuring, if we're going to try a shift in tone as an experiment? I guess, do you have any recommendations for how to track that kind of a experiment with data and it just to streamline it? Because I know, myself and a lot of the other people on this workshop probably are wondering, yeah, this is a great idea, but we don't have the time to, to be tracking each individual post and sorting through it by tone and all of this. So do you have any suggestions for, a way to systematize it that makes it more easily trackable?
Yes and no. I think that the answer to that is that shift in tone is part of your institutional change that you guys are going through, but Cooper Hewitt is as well. And I think measuring that is not something that's neatly done in a single-page report for the CMO. The CMO themselves will know what the perception of your institution is, and they will have hopefully been the ones who want to transform that. There's no simple report on that. I think with Cooper Hewitt, when we've done the stuff around our institutional tone of voice, is we actively were looking for the broader awareness and presence amongst particular people of Cooper Hewitt, and also tracking whether there was a rise in negative feedback. So for us, our institutional tone, as you probably realise with our collection site, has certainly shifted. And one of the institutional fears was that would result in negative feedback from a particular known group of peers. The reverse occurred, and we could also track through analytics traffic to our site as well as on social media that talk about us and about that tone had gone up. This is a little bit like the way marketing departments track press clippings and mentions in the press. And I would again point back to Trevor O'Donnell's
I need to
work.
interrupt you because I think there's your audio. I don't know if you can hear me. Your audio is cutting in and out.
I think that's because I'm doing the screen
Yeah,
share, so I'm
can you
going to
hear
turn
me?
screen share off.
He's
Yeah.
gone again. Yeah. I think
So I've just turned
the
screen share off
suggestion is...
because I think screen share...
Okay.
I've turned screen share off because
Seb, I
the
think
audio suffers as a result of screen share.
Well, what we need to do is bring in the Imperial War Museum, because I know that Jesse and Alison are, in the UK it's nearly 20 past 6, and they're well after hours, so it would be good to go to them. And I think, Seb, while we do that, maybe if you could restart your audio, that's what Susan is suggesting, because it's still cutting out even though you've stopped screen sharing.
Oh, right, okay. Hang on a second.
And meanwhile, Jesse and Allison can unmute themselves so we know they're ready to go. And welcome.
Hi, this is Jesse.
Hi, this is Allison.
Thank you for being with
Hi,
us
guys.
today.
Hi, Alison. Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Hi.
So go ahead, Seb, now that you've restarted.
Yeah,
is that audio clearer?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Good. So in the Imperial War Museum, tell us a little bit about what you're been doing and what's been going on.
I guess I can give you a bit of a background to our social media channels. IWM is actually sort of a family of museums. There are 5 sites altogether. So we've got 5 separate Facebook pages for each branch. And then we run one centralized corporate Twitter account where we share news from across the branches and other historical content. So I think that I sent you details for the IWM London Facebook page, which I guess is what we'll probably look at today. But there are sort of 4 others out there as well, just to let everyone know.
Yeah. So on Twitter, how do you feel your Twitter's going?
It seems to be going pretty well. It's actually what we found with our social audience is that they tend to be quite engaged. So a lot of our content
look like? What does that mean?
Sorry?
What does engagement mean to you when you say they're engaged? What does that mean?
Yes. When I say that, I mean that people tend to retweet or follow links or talk about the material that we're sharing quite a bit. I think it has a lot to do with culturally. A lot of this material relates to people in the UK, particularly Second World War material, which is still present in people's minds and in culture here, and family history plays a big role of sort of the museum's presence in the UK as well, people doing family history research. So we know that there are people out there who really want to know more about these subjects and want to feel connected, I suppose, with 20th century history. So we aim to sort of share content that helps tell personal stories and give a bit more context to things like the bombing of London in the 1940s or the Western Front during the First World War, things like that, just to sort of give a more personal angle to these big events that you learn about in history classes.
Do you so are you actively tracking who does the retweeting or the engagement, or are you only tracking the quantitative volume of retweets? Are you putting them in a spreadsheet, or are you any of that sort of stuff?
Yeah, I've got a couple of spreadsheets, and Alison, my colleague, can probably
talk a bit about some of the tracking that we're doing, but most of it is the hardcore numbers in terms of retweets and click-throughs, and on Facebook it's likes and things like that as well. But that's the stuff that gets recorded into the spreadsheet. But we both pay attention to the people who are retweeting, and you do see sort of you do see similar people or the same people sharing a lot of the material, and you get to recognize some of the Twitter handles and people on Facebook who you know will be engaged with a particular topic. But that stuff isn't officially tracked, I suppose, anywhere at this stage. So there's no reason why it shouldn't be, I suppose.
Do you match any of those?
Allison, you want to go ahead?
Oh, yes. Okay. I was just going to say, I think it is our ambition, though, to be able to take in more qualitative analysis and know who's talking about us regularly so that we can, talk to them in more useful ways and engage with them on a deeper level. But also, knowing what content really triggers people to talk back to us or to talk about it in their own social circles. It's an ambition. Jesse and I are currently looking at tools to measure, and we know that looking out at the marketplace, none of them are really built for museums, which is unfortunate because we've got tons of data in terms of qualitative and quantitative, but we don't, Jesse and I and our team, we don't really have the resource to be spending time looking at it at the level we want to. So yeah. Go ahead, Seb.
Okay, so this is this is a common situation, and I think the challenge for everybody is to convince their senior leadership that this is where things matter, if it does in fact matter. So one thing, perhaps you're using MailChimp for your email newsletters. There is a tool within MailChimp now. It's a paid add-on that will match the public Facebook and Twitter accounts of your email database to each other. So you can start to see who in your email sign-up list is also on Twitter or Facebook, and whether they follow you or are a fan of you. So this starts to knit a deeper picture of who those email subscribers are. Similarly, it gives a direct way potentially of connecting with people who are signed up on your email list that happen to also be Twitter followers that you didn't know was also on your email list, if that makes sense. Does that make sense to everybody? It's kind of a little creepy, but it's, these tools are there. The other thing, I was just, so that's sort of where I think, museums do have core, regular, engaged audiences, but those are very small and they should be knowable. You should be able to know, you should be able to print off a list of the people who are your biggest fans and followers and being able to reach those people directly. This is like when you invited in the past bloggers to press to media events because you knew that bloggers were an important way of getting your message out when blogging was kind of bigger than it is now. Do you invite your most passionate Twitter followers to your media launches or special parties? Do you invite your most engaged Facebook fans to special events? Those are the sort of things where you start to come out of these digital platforms and bring them back to the human relationships. I think these are not difficult things for us to do. They are difficult things for us as institutions to think about, though, often because we see digital as a way of pushing things out, not as a way of being connected with the humans at the other end of the keyboards or screens, because really keyboards seem to be disappearing too. So that sort of sense of, are kind of there ways that, you could identify your top 50 most repeat engaging Facebook commenters and personally reach out to them to invite them to a special event that other people would have to pay for or wouldn't come along to. Could you do the same with Twitter? Sorry, I have a horrible feeling that my connection has dropped, but I'm not sure. Susan, am I there?
Yeah, I don't know what happened to Jesse and Allison.
Oh, okay.
Hi.
That's weird.
Hello? Hello? Oh,
Seb had asked you a question. We'll have Seb ask it again. There's obviously a delay between when one of us speaks and the next one hears.
Have you found a way, have you identified, say, your top 50 Twitter followers and your top 50 Facebook fans? And could you reach out to them and give them a special face-to-face experience with the Imperial War Museum?
yeah, I mean, we haven't, I guess, officially noted those people down, but I think it would be easy enough to find out who they are. I mean, we already see more or less the same people retweeting a lot of our content on Twitter. So from there, it would be relatively easy to work it out, I suppose. But I think that's a really nice idea, actually, to engage with people who are local, and not something.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's where you start to get actionable stuff. You know, these are things that are also tangible to the rest of the institution. And also, this is back to SF MoMA as well. They signal that institutional shift. They signal that someone engaging with you on another platform beyond walking in the door actually matter to you, not in just matter in a did they see our media release, but actually matter in a human to institution sort of way, or preferably human to human. Could your super fans get a private tour with a curator because they love the stuff you're tweeting about at the moment? You know, that sort of thing. There's great opportunities there. I mean, that's where, you know, it's not necessarily about producing a report, but what you could get out of that.
I think that's something we could definitely look to take forward here. I know that we're looking at the IWM London Facebook at the moment. It's an interesting thing to think about in terms of ongoing engagement, because for a couple of our other branches, the Facebook demographics tend to sway more towards being an overseas audience, just because of the nature of the historical site. So it's just continuous engagement. It's another way to keep people coming back to us and also giving them that deeper and more personal.
So what is important though, because you're saying that for a lot of the other sites, you have these global people who are engaging with you, what you need to differentiate out of that is, are they engaging with you once in terms of becoming a fan, liking kind of your page, or are they engaging with your content, i.e. the who is talking about this? Are they the same people over time? Because if they're not, you're getting these one-off sort of tourist style engagers, which may not have the same value as others do.
I think that's been really helpful, Seb. Jesse, do you have anything else?
Okay, good. It's very hard to do this over this internet thing. This internet training thing is very I don't know. It's very foreign, I guess. Okay, so how are we going for time here? Should we switch to our third guinea pig?
Yes, so we've got Lisa and Abby at the Museum of Jewish Heritage, and then we'll go ahead and talk about some of the big Q&A or questions that have come up in the back channel. So
yeah, that'd be great.
Are Lisa and Abby there?
Lisa and Abby, remember, there you go.
We are here. Does that work?
So tell us a bit about what you're doing and what you're trying to do.
Well, it's funny you should ask. The institution itself, its whole physical being, is a Jewish history museum. We focus on telling Jewish history during the 20th and 21st century, life before, during, and after the Holocaust. And that theme is absolutely carried out in our social media, which is why I love the San Francisco, MoMA cat as Van Gogh picture. Our posts tend to be a bit more serious. We do get to have some fun around the holidays where we ask people for recipes, but in general, our tone is what you might expect.
Mm-hmm. So what does success look like for you then?
Well, I will say success looks like Justin Bieber. When Justin Bieber commented about his visit to the Anne Frank Museum, we took that as an opportunity to find out from our audiences what they thought of it, and we had a lot of interaction that day. Now, I realize a lot of interaction for us is not the same as a lot of interaction for San Francisco MoMA, and I think at the moment I'm sort of grateful you're not able to show stats, but that was a very exciting day.
Okay, so how did the Justin Bieber example is interesting in that you were able to comment on the Bieber event, but you were not. Your comparison for success in that is what? How do you know that you've been more or less successful than someone else who's outraged about that or interested in it or whatever has an opinion on it? That's really all that matters, is that in that moment on April 15 when you did the what do you think about Justin Bieber and the Anne Frank house incident, that you claimed some attention space for some people somewhere. Who else were you competing against in that? Were they competitors? Did you feed into that? Did you get any help from others? Did people send traffic to you as the official voice of, that sort of, like how did this differ from your director doing a media release and a public statement about the institution's position on this? Well, that I know you didn't do, but if you had, that's...
Right. I mean, our purpose of doing it really was to engage, because, in fact, we couldn't state an opinion about what he did. All we could do was put it out there so that other people could express their opinion. And that's, unfortunately, the situation we are in.
Okay, so, but you are thus, this is poking at this a little bit more, you are assuming that you have particular reach to people who otherwise would not have known about that. Yes? Or that people would talk to you about that in a way that they wouldn't, say, on the Guardian's website or the New York Times website or in BuzzFeed or all the other billions of other places that also commented and had more freedom to comment too.
Yes, I think they certainly did, but our audience online, we believe, is certainly interested in our content. So all things relating to the Holocaust, all things relating to Anne Frank, is of particular interest to this audience. And so they get very passionate about these things.
And that you capture their passion in a different way to that passion being captured when they also read the New York Times.
I'm not.
Is that true? Do you offer a very specific, I mean, there's this idea of the museum as agora, this forum space for discussing complicated issues and ideas, and the museum provides a unique space for this to happen in. That's definitely the case physically, but I think in the digital space that isn't as clear. There are now many, many other places that people can have these agoric experiences. Is that even a word? Agoric experiences on kind of line that don't need museums to create a safe space on kind of line for them. So I'm questioning whether you are able to define what that specific museumness that you create gives that isn't available somewhere else.
Well, I think we do provide a certain community for these folks. So I think that probably on their end, there's a comfort level in having a conversation within the Museum of Jewish Heritage community, which they have been a part of, at least on Facebook, versus an article in the New York Times, and they wouldn't necessarily comment. So I guess
okay. So
there is an online.
If that's the case, being the devil's advocate again, being that the case, you should be able to identify those people by name and know whether they are in your museum's email list, whether they're your Facebook fans and friends, and whether they're also on Twitter, because you know who they are. And
right.
Thus you should be able to engage in quite specific conversations with them publicly on those channels that draw out more of their perspectives on issues such as this.
Yes.
So that, in my mind, doesn't need any specific tool. It just needs time to go through and identify, cross-match all those people. This is what development departments do, I imagine, when they're not raising money, is that they try to identify the specific people who are most deeply engaged with the institution.
Yes.
Okay, so in that sense, I'm not sure that there's any analytics tool that is really necessary other than time and resource then for your one, because I think you have, looking at the figures on your Facebook, that Justin Bieber post that you did on the 15th was, it had roughly 1,000 views, 60 odd people clicked on it, and 11 people talked about it to their friends. So, that's quite good, but there were some other posts that you did more recently on that day as well that were more...
That, later that day, the Boston Marathon bombing.
Exactly, that's exactly what I was going to say. So these moments in these channels are very... There's no, there's a certain degree that things happen in the world and attention goes to other things very fast. And this is one of the challenges with resourcing social media as a thing that, operates as some kind of magic pony, is that attention in the world is extremely scarce, and attention to museum stuff when they're not in our physical buildings is a real struggle. That's just the reality of the world. So we have to try to figure out a way that the way our museum physically works generally reasonably, where people feel safe and talk about things. We can deploy strategies and we can test and experiment with kind of strategies to make that come across on kind of line. So when someone's attention does come to us, our Facebook page or our email broadcast or whatever it is, that it actually has effect, and that people will keep their attention with us rather than going somewhere else. And that, I think is very, very hard. And I think the Culture 24 research between the last one and now possibly has begun to hint that our attention share might have declined in the intervening two years, probably through no action of our own, other than that world has got more turbulent and noisy. And that doesn't mean we should also become more noisy. It probably means we need to focus in on the communities that we can deeply engage with and find ways of expanding those through social recommendation and referral and particular targeted strategies around that. Because I think in your case, you have a very specific purpose, and that is different to SF MoMA, and it's different to the Imperial War Museum. And there are potentially in your institution far deeper ties to actual people than in IEarth or of the other two, and those are what synchronizing your database of people is very valuable to you, because it begins to understand those people better. Anyway, I think we're running out of time, so I'm going to go back to Vicky. What are we doing?
Oh, this is Dana. So we have about 12 minutes left, and we have some big questions that came up in the course of the chat that I think we could talk about. Just a quick thank you so much to the 3 organizations who were willing to talk with us about your goals and your challenges with measurement. And Lisa and Abby, if one of you can put in the chat a link to the discussion that you were talking about, the Justin Bieber discussion, that would be great. Some people would like to take a look at the original source material, I guess, for that. So Seb, Jane, Vicki, I have a few questions that came up over the course that I'd like to put out to you. So I'll start with one that I think is interesting. If it's true that most audiences, despite all the web and new media, if it's true that our audiences are still traditional, still the same, what do you think we can be doing with social media to change that and reach new audiences?
I would say it isn't just social media. It is the institution. And traditionally, I know museums have tried to attack the issues of diversity and relevance through little projects and the like. This has to be more than that. We need to be far more serious and realize that social media may be the way to reach audiences, new audiences, but that if we haven't ourselves changed, it doesn't matter if we reach them or not, that they will still not be engaged with us. They might know we exist, but that won't change whether they do anything with us. Jane? I mean, you've done lots in the cultural sector around this stuff, and this is common, isn't it?
Yeah, I agree with you. It's not just about social media. It's more about how you can offer somebody something that is some kind of unique experience for them, perhaps, or a unique offer. So the platform that you choose to communicate with them on, or the one they choose to communicate with you on, isn't the point. It's the right message to the right person. So the example that Seb gave of maybe picking your most engaged Facebook user and trying to get them to come to an event, or same with somebody on Twitter, is a really nice kind of practical example of helping somebody to make a transition from being just perhaps on the periphery of your organization to coming inside and actually experiencing something. And I think really engagement means that. It means something that could be transformative, where you're getting somebody to do more than just like or share something. It's where you're actually getting them to consider something, do something that's a bit more meaningful.
Great. I think a common theme that came up a lot is that people feel overwhelmed with all of the data available to them and are wondering, well, first of all, I guess, who has the time to do this? But I guess maybe a more productive way to think about it is, what kind of advice would you give someone on how to most effectively and efficiently use their time in getting analytics that are actionable for them?
I'd like to answer that. And it's not a very popular answer, but it's basically do less and don't do anything unless you're measuring it and acting on it. So if you're active in 5 channels, pick one and do that one and measure that, and then see if it's working. Because there is no point in being active in 5 if you have no idea what is actually happening in them, or what impact you're having. I really think that if you're having to make very difficult choices about time, you're better to do less well and be able to argue the case then internally that you've done one thing, you've got data from it that is going to that's driving your decision making, and that you now want to get the same thing from another platform, but you're arguing internally for the case. Without that data, we're all just sort of talking into the blind.
Yeah, I mean, I'd add to that. One thing we did, we had at Cooper Hewitt, we have a very desirable museum shop that sells a lot of unique design products, which is a unique thing for us, and a lot of people loved our shop. I think one of the interesting things was that people were like, oh, well, you should be on Pinterest, because obviously there's a close match between the Pinterest user base and the audience of your shop. All right, so we did a trial and we started to put and talk about products on Pinterest, and then we looked at not only whether more traffic came to our web shop, but also whether they were more or less likely to buy. So using GA, our analytics package again, we were able to track whether the value of Pinterest drove more sales or simply drove more awareness of our shop, which is great, or whether it simply drew more awareness of the products that people went then to Amazon to buy cheaper. So, you know, we were able over a period of time to get some hard quantitative data about what are the best channels for selling the product, i.e. people buying stuff, versus what are the best channels for getting people to come back and look at our shop, but not kind of necessarily buy. And also how many people would sign up for the email list for product news and special deals as a result of coming in from different channels. So again, an experiment that ran for about six months to gather real data, and then help inform decisions about what the shop did in their very limited time they had available to promote and market. And we found, you know, not surprisingly, that perhaps Pinterest was great at building awareness, but it didn't end up in sales yet, which is important. The yet is an important bit of that. But then we can now make better choices.
Great. So I think another common theme is that people are impressed with the Let's Get Real project, and I think two questions here is, one, how did that impact the organizations that were involved, and what kind of changes that actionable research that you did? And then how do we get a Let's Get Real happening in the United States?
Well, I think without exception, I think all of the organizations who've been involved have changed the way they are doing all of their digital stuff and wider into the organization. I mean, Kate, because of the role of Elena and her PhD work, I think, and the fact that they've created an actual post, have changed the most. But the Imperial War Museum, who we were talking to earlier, were in the first round, and I know that they changed a lot of their internal reporting and how they reported and who they reported to, as did the Maritime Museum and as the British Museum has done. And even the smaller organizations who are coming on board to the phase 2 now, they're beginning, I think the biggest thing is that they're able to find metrics that are helping them to argue for more investment and more time. So this thing around choosing the most effective strategy and which platform, we really need to have more time and resources to work out what the data is that we need to know, and that those cases can only be made by having examples of how useful it is. So
yeah, and I would add to that a lot of the value from the Culture 24 Let's Get Real project was getting all of us in the same physical room at the same time across many museums and performing arts orgs that shared audience and talking about our stuff honestly. And I was based in Sydney at the time, and I would fly across for the workshops and back again. And I also would return with great insights about ways people are facing the same issues across institutions. And that's really the other value of the project. As far as getting an American one up, a bunch of us have been talking about that, and I think it may happen.
Excellent.
we're totally up for it. I would love to do it.
Great.
So if there's anybody listening who is interested, maybe MCN could kind of coordinate any interest for us.
I think MCN would really enjoy being involved in that. Yes.
Yeah. I mean,
it could be a good topic for discussion at our...
Sorry. It's about time for us to wrap up. What I was going to say is if you had a question that didn't get answered, go ahead and leave your Twitter account or email address in the chat before you sign off, and we'll try to get back to you. And I think that might also be a good place for people in North America, somebody just said Canada, to say if you'd like us to follow up with you about Let's Get Real US. Thank you so much to our presenters and our guinea pigs, and for all of you listening. This has been fantastic. Vicki, did you have?
Yeah, and on behalf of MCN, thank you everyone for joining us for this workshop. Again, we have 2 more coming up. Please do fill out the evaluation and let us know what you thought of this very interactive format that we used this time around. And again, MCN would be really interested in talking about a Let's Get Real in the US. So let's think about that for the conference.
Thank you, everybody. Cool. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Cheers. See ya.
Thanks, James. Sure.